I work as an adult film actress, while my fiancé, Ola, is a wealthy heir who always avoids women. Despite my numerous attempts to seduce him, he remains unfazed, until one night when he makes an exception for his secretary. Taking off my engagement ring, I calmly ask him to end the engagement. Alaire, always composed, suddenly tears up. After finishing a night shoot, I return home to find the light still on in Alaire's study. I quietly remove my heels and tiptoe past, only to hear the doorknob turn and his low voice ask, "Have you thought it over?" He's asking about my decision to leave the entertainment industry and become a full-time wife. I freeze and turn to look at him. Allah, known for his cold demeanor, has eyes that are as icy towards me as they are towards others. His usual emotionless gaze sends a pang through my chest. After taking a deep breath, I hesitate for a long time before responding. I don't want to give up the career I've fought for all these years. Before I can finish, Ayla interrupts with a mocking laugh. "Being an adult film star is your career?" His eyes scan me with disdain. I fall silent. And after a long pause, he spits out his final words, slams the door, and storms off into the guest room. "Either you quit or we break up. Your choice." This is the 10th time we've argued since getting engaged. And like the previous 9, he demands I quit my job, but I refuse. We grew up together as childhood sweethearts in the same neighborhood, and Arla was always kind to me. The clean-cut boy in a white shirt would help me whenever I stumbled, saying, "Maxine, be careful." He protected me from bullies, even when it meant getting hurt himself. I can't remember exactly when I started liking him, but I do recall a summer when I was 17. He slipped a ruby ring on my finger and smiled brightly, telling me never to take it off. That ring had belonged to Ola's mother and was his most cherished possession. However, fate was cruel. Soon after, my family went bankrupt and sank deep into debt. My parents, overwhelmed by the situation, committed suicide, leaving only my ailing grandmother and me behind. Desperate for money, I turned to Ola for help, but he was too consumed by his family's power struggles to care. With no other options, I was approached by a scout who handed me a business card and said, "With a body like yours, you could make quick cash in the film industry." Without thinking, I signed a contract, only to later realize that nearly half the roles required me to wear a bikini. As I hesitated, covering myself, the director noticed and shouted, "It's just a bit of sexiness. What's the problem? You're not doing anything else. Get rid of that ridiculous pride if you still want to make money." Thinking of my grandmother's expensive medical treatments, I swallowed my pride and let my hands fall. That film made me famous overnight, and sponsorships came flooding in. But the price of success was high. I became labeled as an adult film star. No matter how many serious roles I took on after that, or the variety of characters I portrayed, people would laugh and joke about me, focusing only on my body. Allah seemed particularly bothered by this. After defeating his half-brother and securing his place in the family, he returned to find me. One day, as I was leaving a commercial shoot, a wealthy middle-aged man approached me and asked, "Miss Maxine, how much for a night?" Trembling with anger, I realized he thought I was playing dumb. "You started as an adult film star, and now you're pretending to be innocent? Come on." Though I'd worked hard for 7 years and reached the top, some people still assumed I'd used my body to get there. Before I could react, Allah kicked the man to the ground, pressing his leather shoe into the man's hand. "Sorry, what did you say?" Who do you want to be with? The man quickly apologized after seeing Allah. Once the chaos subsided, Allah pulled me into his arms and whispered into my ear. Is this how you've been ruining yourself after all these years? I lowered my gaze, touching the ruby ring, and laughed. Yes. No one helped me, so I had to help myself. Ayla's expression softened, and he held me tighter, almost crushing me. It's my fault for coming too late. The night unfolded naturally after that. But just before we were about to take things further, Allah suddenly pushed me away. His eyes held an unreadable expression, and he asked, Have you been defiled? I froze as a wave of bitterness and disbelief crashed over me, and tears started to fall. Seeing me cry, Ayla panicked, repeatedly apologizing. Maxine, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Please don't cry. It hurts me to see you like this. Let's get engaged again. And you won't have to work so hard anymore. I choked on my words, unable to speak. What Allah didn't realize was that without my career and those film contracts, my grandmother wouldn't have survived, and I wouldn't have been able to pay off my debts. What he despised about my past had actually saved me from ruin. Snapping back to reality, I knocked on the guest room door for one last attempt. Ayla sat on the couch, looking up with a determined gleam in his eyes. Have you made your decision? I sat down across from him, ready to speak honestly, but my phone rang, interrupting me. Allah glanced at the caller ID and quickly turned his phone face down. The whole process took less than 3 seconds, but I still caught the name, Mina, Alia's secretary. In my first year in the entertainment industry, Alia had met Mina, a graduate from a prestigious university. She helped him seize power and climb to the top, and their relationship became very close. Aren't you going to answer? It could be important, I suggested. Ayla frowned and immediately ended the call. What's important? Go on, keep talking. I took a deep breath and explained how I had risen from obscurity to stardom. At first, Allah listened intently, but then he began glancing at his phone. When it rang again, he stood up and interrupted me, saying, I've got something to take care of. Go to sleep without waiting for me. The door slammed behind him, and I realized how urgent his business was. Not wasting any time, I jumped into my car and followed him. When I arrived, I saw Mina in a bikini, hooking her fingers around Allah's tie. My entire body froze as she mimicked the seductive expression I had once used in a movie. Does Maxine know you despise her for being an adult film star, but still have me dress up like her to satisfy you? So, between me and her, who do you prefer? Ayla, clearly enjoying the moment, pulled her close and smirked. Of course it's you, babe. Then why didn't you answer my call? Were you with her? She asked. Stop overthinking it, Allah replied. I think she's filthy. Satisfied, Mina smiled and kissed him. They embraced and walked into the villa together. I stood there for 2 hours, feeling the cold slowly creep into my bones, reaching deep into my heart. It had been 6 months since Allah and I got engaged, and in all that time, he never touched me. Every time things heated up, he would stop gently, kiss my forehead, and head to the shower. I tried everything to seduce him, but nothing worked. Let's save this for our wedding night, okay? He said. I believed him then, but now, after seeing him with Mina, everything felt like a lie. Stumbling back home, I spent the night in the living room, unable to sleep. As dawn broke, I heard the front door open. Ayla must not have expected me to still be awake. When he saw me, he froze for a moment, before snapping out of it. He furrowed his brow, then picked me up and carried me to the bedroom, asking, "Why aren't you sleeping? I told you not to wait for me." I noticed a strange sweet scent on him and pushed his hands away, speaking calmly. "I'm not leaving the industry, Ola." The moment the words left my mouth, he seemed to find them ridiculous. "Pick one. If you won't leave the industry, then you'll have to leave the engagement," he said, sure that I loved him too much to choose my career over him. "Are you joking, Maxine?" he asked, his disbelief evident. I met his eyes and replied softly but firmly, "You asked me to choose, and I choose my career." When my family went bankrupt and I hit rock bottom, Ayla wasn't there for me. I didn't hold it against him, as I understood his situation was difficult at the time. But last night, hearing him say, "Touch her and I'll think she's dirty," was like a knife to my heart. The man I had loved for 7 years now seemed distant and unrecognizable. I closed my eyes, my voice trembling as I whispered, "It's over, Alea." For the first time, I saw Ola's ever-composed demeanor break. His neck muscles tightened, and his breathing quickened as tears welled up in his eyes. Grabbing my wrist, he asked bitterly, "Do you really enjoy being in that industry so much? So much that you'd give up me? Give up being a part of a wealthy family? Or are you just upset because I forced you to choose?" Before I could respond, he slipped the ruby ring back onto my finger, saying, "Stop saying things that hurt. Go rest, and we'll talk later." He left the room quietly, and I curled my fingers around the ring, staring at its sparkling surface. 7 years ago, the young man who had given me this ring was full of love and warmth. But now that person seemed long gone. The phone on the table buzzed twice, breaking my thoughts. I answered, and Susan, my agent, was frantic. "Your endorsement deal just got cancelled, and the show you're filming replaced you. The penalty fees have already hit my account. Who's behind all this?" she asked, her tone filled with panic. I stayed quiet and gave a slight hum in response. Susan, who knew me well, sensed something was wrong. After a pause, she hesitated. "Did you have a fight with Mr. Ola? Did he do this?" I gave a bitter smile. Who else could freeze all my resources in just 10 minutes? Alla, who had stakes in several entertainment companies, was clearly behind it. I exhaled slowly and said, "It wasn't a fight. It was a breakup, an annulment." But evidently, Ola wasn't ready to accept that. After hanging up, I heard a faint sound coming from the kitchen. When I stepped into the living room, I saw Ayla, now dressed in casual home clothes, tied an apron around his waist, cooking fish soup. He glanced at me and smiled softly. "You're up. I made fish soup. Your favorite? Want some?" He ladled the soup into a bowl and offered it to me, but I didn't take it. I simply asked, "You cancelled my endorsement, didn't you?" Avoiding the question, Alla placed the bowl on the counter and waved his hand in front of me. "I burnt myself. Aren't you going to show some concern?" His voice carried a playful tone as he tried to make light of the situation. He sighed, clearly frustrated, then moved closer, trying to embrace me. I stepped back, meeting his surprised gaze with a steady one. At 26, Alla definitely loved me. He had no financial limits, and I could buy anything, even a private jet, without him blinking an eye. Some people advised him not to spoil me so much, but he would smile and say, "I make money so my wife can spend it." On my grandmother's 80th birthday, he cancelled all his plans to be there. My grandmother even asked how we ended up together, and he answered while peeling an apple. I knew I wanted her when I was 17. It all sounded perfect. But behind my back, he had been with Mina. And not only that, he called me dirty. Remembering that, I shook my head bitterly. I'm not angry, Oller. I've already made up my mind. Annul the engagement. That last sentence hit him hard. His smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard expression. I've humbled myself to make things right with you, and this is what I get. He was clearly furious, but I remained unmoved, staring back at him. Seeing that his anger wasn't getting through to me, he softened his tone and pleaded. It's about the industry, right? I blocked your resources because I don't want you in the spotlight. If you really don't want to quit, maybe you can work behind the scenes. I just don't want my wife to be the subject of gossip. Finally, he said it. The real reason. The gossip surrounding me, the escort rumors. Allah rubbed his temple, avoiding my gaze, but I knew what he meant. That's not the point, he said quietly. Let's not waste time fighting. We should be loving each other. I couldn't help but laugh. Loving each other? Allah, you cheated on me long ago. What's love got to do with it? His face drained of color. I stared at him with cold eyes, tears slowly trickling down my face. Do you understand, Allah? A traitor never deserves forgiveness. He seemed completely drained, barely able to stand, as if all the life had been sucked out of him. He couldn't even offer a rebuttal. All he could do was whisper my name repeatedly, his breath uneven. In the end, even he didn't know what to say. Was he about to declare his love for me again? Or continue pleading for my forgiveness? Tears rolled down his face, but I didn't look at him anymore. I took off the ring, placed it on the counter, and turned to leave. Allah chased after me, wrapping his arms around me from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. A few sobs slipped from his throat. Where are you going? Don't leave me. Don't be so cruel. I know I was wrong. Please give me one more chance. I struggled free with all my strength, backing away until the door opened. He tried to catch my hand, but grasped nothing but air. My eyes red, I forced a bitter smile. Allah, I'm not filthy. But you're the dirty one. He froze, not daring to come any closer. Are you afraid, Allah? The mighty, untouchable Allah, scared of losing me. But you were the one who let go first. Half an hour later, I was back at my place. Susan and my assistant were waiting by the door, clearly having been there for a while. Are you okay? Are you hungry? I got your favorite dumplings, my assistant asked cautiously. I instinctively said I was fine, but after failing to enter the door code 3 times, I broke down crying. Allah's words before I left kept echoing in my mind. Leave me, and you'll just be even more trapped. I didn't stop walking or even look back. He stood by the doorway, kicking the door in frustration, calling me heartless. I couldn't understand. How did we, who had once loved each other so deeply, end up here, hating one another? Susan crouched down and hugged me tightly. It's okay. Don't cry. Leaving someone like him, cutting your losses in time. You should feel relieved. My assistant scrambled to grab tissues, wiping my tears. Her voice trembling with emotion as she tried to comfort me. Seeing them both so upset on my behalf, standing up for me, I suddenly felt a warmth fill my heart. Girls really are the best. I wiped my tears and forced a smile. That night they stayed with me, until we all got drunk, talking until dawn. Finally, I let out all my pent-up feelings. I raised my champagne glass and clinked it with Susan's from across the room. After we finished, she smiled at me. Here's to a new beginning. Tears almost fell again. Those first few years were tough. There's a hierarchy in the entertainment world, and for someone like me, who started based on my looks, getting decent roles was like climbing a steep hill. Susan's stomach was ruined from all the drinking back then. I'll never forget how she, drunk and stumbling, still managed to push me in front of the director of Little Dimple. This is Maxine. She may look slender, but she's tough. She spent the whole winter in cold water without complaining and didn't cry out when she fell from the wires. Give her a chance. She blocked the director's path, passionately praising me. And after being amused by her persistence, the director gave me an audition. That role ended up being mine. When the movie hit $100 million at the box office, Susan smiled and raised a glass with me, just like today. May you always walk a path of flowers, Maxine. But now it felt like that flower path was coming to an end. What's your plan now? Susan asked as she stood by the window, her arm slung over my shoulder. Are you going to keep working or take a break? I blinked and glanced out the window. The night was quiet and cool. The once bustling city now shrouded in silence, with only a few scattered lights still glowing, guiding the late-night wanderers home. After a moment of thought, I softly replied, Susan, I think I want to go visit my grandma. In March, I returned to my hometown. A spring rain had just fallen, and I carried an umbrella as I walked to Grandma's house. Snippets of conversation drifted my way. Did you hear? Brian is coming here tomorrow to shoot a film. Really? Here. This place is so remote. Yes, he even suggested it to the director. I paused for a moment but kept walking as if I hadn't heard. Grandma wasn't expecting me. She was dozing in her rocking chair. But the moment I stepped into the yard, she seemed to sense it and opened her eyes. She froze briefly, then broke into a wide smile and hurried to greet me. My little treasure, what brings you home so suddenly? 7 years ago, Grandma had heart surgery, and the doctors warned her against stress and heavy activity. I smiled, linking my arm with hers. I missed your cooking, Grandma. She playfully pinched my nose, teasing me for being a glutton, then glanced behind me several times. Where's Ayla? Didn't he come with you this time? Hearing his name made my throat tighten, and tears threatened to spill. I hadn't planned to tell Grandma, but with both my parents gone, she was my only family left. How could I hide it from her? So, I buried myself in her arms, letting the tears flow. We've separated. I thought she'd ask me why or subtly probe for details, but she didn't. She just gently tucked my hair behind my ear. You can make any decision you want, and I'll always support you. At that moment, I thought, how could I be so lucky to have such an amazing grandmother? I really, really love her. That night, I slept beside her, just like I did when I was a child, as she softly patted my back until I drifted off. The next morning, after the rain had cleared, I opened the door and spotted a familiar figure. A man stood tall under a pear tree, the mist partially obscuring his face, making it hard to read his expression. The wind carried the scent of pear blossoms, swirling softly around the tree. As I walked closer, he raised his brows at me. I froze for a second, then spoke first. Long time no see, Brian. He didn't say a word, just stared at me, much like 5 years ago when we finished filming together. He had confessed his feelings for me under that same pear tree, and I had turned him down. Back then, he was silent too. Since that day, every time we met at events, he was always the first to look away. Thinking of this, I lowered my eyes, regretting that I had greeted him. Seconds passed. I awkwardly smiled, ready to walk away. But the sudden sound of my phone vibrating broke the silence. "Brian, you said you were going to meet someone. It's been almost 2 hours. Why aren't you back yet?" "The shoot's about to start." I paused in my steps, ready to leave. Meet someone? Was Brian supposed to meet me? I wondered. Lost in thought, I overheard his assistant's voice from the phone. But Brian didn't seem to be in a hurry. Even though he was much taller than me, he bent slightly to bring his gaze level with mine. "It's been a while, Maxine," he said slowly, his voice calm and pleasant. With a slight smile, I stood still, not having spoken a word yet, when the assistant director interrupted. He called out, "Miss Maxine, we're looking for someone more innocent for the female lead. You're a bit too well endowed in certain areas. Not quite suitable. Do you understand?" He cleared his throat, clearly with ill intentions. Laughter from the people around me echoed, and I stood frozen, gripping the edges of my dress, my face reddening. Although I had faced similar situations before, I couldn't afford to show my frustration. Losing my composure would only make it more difficult for Susan to fight for me in the future. The mocking laughter still lingered in my ears when, unexpectedly, a clear male voice intervened. "Is this funny?" Brian stood at the door, cigarette in hand, coldly scanning the room. His gaze finally fixed on the assistant director. "You're fired." The assistant director, clearly annoyed, raised his voice, asking, "The director hasn't said anything yet. Who are you to fire me?" The room fell into an uneasy silence as the director's face went pale. Brian flicked away his cigarette, lazily looking up and squinting. "Sorry, but this is actually my decision. After all, Charlie is my father." I remembered that Charlie was the biggest investor in this film, and rearranging the crew was as simple as a phone call for him. The assistant director, stunned, kept apologizing to me as he was forced out, hoping I'd intercede on his behalf. But I didn't. I wasn't a saint. After this incident, Brian and the director sat at the front, watching me intently as I performed. The role of the female lead in Little Pear Dimple was that of a pure college girl who was kidnapped and forced into the world of prostitution, but eventually meets the man who rescues her. I spent 3 months deeply studying the character's psychology, mastering the tone of every line and the smallest facial expressions. What no one knew was that for those 10 minutes of screen time, I had practiced relentlessly behind closed doors. So, when the director called out "cut," I was still fully immersed in the role, a tear hanging from the corner of my eye. Brian, ever the gentleman, handed me a tissue and complimented me. "Good performance." I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination, but I thought I saw a hint of appreciation in his eyes. The contract was signed right then and there. I was so excited that I rushed to the stairwell to call Susan and share the good news. As I stepped out, I noticed someone standing outside. Brian, his hands in his pockets, was leaning against the wall, cigarette between his lips. He must have been looking for a quiet spot to smoke, but stopped when he heard someone inside. I gave him a polite smile, preparing to walk past him, but Brian tilted his head slightly and called out to me. When I turned to look at him, he fell silent. His dark eyes, like the full moon after the fog lifts over the sea, were both bright and distant. After a long pause, he softly said, "Congratulations, my leading lady." I remembered that Brian wasn't one to involve himself in other people's business, but that time he had unexpectedly stood up for me. After joining the crew, I asked him why. The afternoon sunlight streamed into the lounge as Brian stood by the window reading the script, not even bothering to look up when he casually answered, "It's just wearing a swimsuit. Why should that be stigmatized?" I hadn't expected him to be so blunt, and I froze for a moment. Brian didn't wait for my response, closed the script, and walked toward me. We locked eyes for a brief moment, and then he gave me a small smile. What women wear in front of the camera is their own choice. This industry is filthy, with men having one-night stands and cheating. Why is no one criticizing them, but they're so harsh on the women who make films? Brian looked at me seriously and gently ruffled my hair. "If you ever hear those rumors again, stand up for yourself. Don't be afraid. I've got your back." His voice resonated within me, as clear and pure as the shimmering surface of a lake in sunlight. That afternoon, the weather was beautiful, but everything before me felt clouded. It wasn't until Brian left and the tears began to fall onto my script that I realized those few words from him were a form of salvation. As filming neared its end, the media came in for interviews, and the crew arranged for the lead actors to exchange farewell gifts. I had prepared a bottle of Bulgari green tea perfume with a pear blossom note, fresh and clean just before a rainstorm. Brian accepted it with a smile, his lips curving into a perfect arc. "Thank you, I really like it." The host, trying to liven up the mood, joked, "As long as it's from Flora Eden, do you like it?" Flora and Eden were the names of our characters, and the question had multiple meanings. I noticed Brian's assistant signaling him to skip this topic, but Brian ignored him, chuckling softly and openly admitting, "Of course, because she deserves it." After saying that, Brian let a delicate necklace slip from his fingers and placed it around my neck. The tattoos on his arm became more visible to both me and the cameras. One of a small 5-petal pear blossom. My heart skipped a beat, feeling like something was about to burst. The interview was broadcast live, and by the time it ended, both Brian's and my names were trending. That night, I received a phone call for the first time in a long while. It was Allah, his voice slurring as if he were drunk. "Maxine, will you wait for me just a little longer? Wait for me to inherit the family business, and I'll come find you. Please don't be with him. No one loves you more than I do." Back then, I really liked Allah, so without hesitation, I agreed. After that, I avoided Brian for a long time. It wasn't until the last day of filming, after the crew's dinner, that I saw him again. I was waiting for a car by the pear tree outside the restaurant when he appeared behind me. "How long do you plan to avoid me?" he asked. I hadn't noticed him approach. The twilight blurred his profile, and the fiery clouds at the horizon slowly colored the tips of his ears. "You can't be blind. I like you." I froze. I thought avoiding him would be the answer, but he wouldn't give up. His gaze was so intense that I couldn't look him in the eyes. I quickly averted my gaze. How did I reject him back then? I wondered. I said, "Brian, maybe you're still in character." From the moment we started filming, he had always called me Little Dimple, the pet name the male lead used for the female lead in the movie. Was he in love with Little Dimple, the character, or with me? Maxine. I couldn't tell, and I didn't want to figure it out. Brian opened his mouth, seemingly about to argue, but then noticed the emptiness of my neck and froze. I took the necklace from my bag and handed it back to him. The ruby ring he had worn that night immediately caught his attention, making his eyes flash with emotion. That evening, Brian silently stared at me for a long time before we parted. He smiled bitterly. Fine. Pretend I was never in character. Then, for 5 whole years, we had no contact. The only interaction we had was when the news of my engagement to Arla went viral. Brian quietly liked the post and privately sent me a message. Be happy, little dimple. I replied with 2 words. Thank you. This time, Brian truly came to see me on purpose. The female lead of the film he was working on was a rich girl with no acting skills, and the entire crew was fed up with her. So, he recommended me to the director. I lowered my eyes, hesitant. I was supposed to go shopping with my grandmother today. She had promised to cook my favorite dish for me. Before I could refuse, I saw her carrying a bamboo basket, walking out of the house with a gentle smile. Go ahead, little darling. I'm old now, and you're busy with work. You rarely come home. Make more movies. That way, when I miss you, I can just turn on the TV and see you. A wave of emotion surged in my chest like a stone thrown into a calm lake. Ripples spreading. I followed Brian to the set without hesitation. The audition and costume fitting went smoothly. But what I didn't expect was that when I was about to sign the contract, someone suddenly burst in and snatched the pen from my hand. Stop messing around, Maxine. Come home with me. It had only been 2 days, but Ola had aged significantly. His eyes were bloodshot, hiding some unspoken pain. I smiled faintly and tilted my head to look at him. Mr. Allah, if you don't have Alzheimer's, you should remember that we've broken up. Allah froze. Behind him stood Na, her face radiating joy, her gaze full of smug satisfaction. She probably thought she could finally take my place. But in the next moment, Allah shattered her fantasy. You were the one who broke up with me. I didn't agree. Maxine, really? He was so shameless. My smile froze at the edge of my lips, and I clearly noticed the flicker of envy in her eyes. Ayla apologized to the director, then grabbed my arm, pulling me out of the room. It seemed like he feared I would resist, so he tightened his grip, causing a sharp pain that made me wince. Let go. You're hurting me. He didn't listen until a firm hand landed on his shoulder. Brian stepped forward, positioning himself protectively behind me. His expression dark as he glared at Ola. She told you to let go. Are you deaf? Ola blinked in confusion for a moment, his gaze shifting between me and Brian. Then he sneered. What's this? 5 years later, and you still like her? He grinned triumphantly, mockingly asking, should I call you Mr. Brian, or maybe defeated rival? The room fell silent, my heart raced, unsure of what was about to unfold. Brian's hand, hanging by his side, was clenched into a fist, muscles taut. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, his voice low but resolute. You won, but did you ever value her? The answer was unmistakable. Ayla pursed his lips in silence and stretched his hand out to me, holding a ruby ring in his palm, smiling at me as if trying to win me over. Come here. I promise I'll never hurt you again. That smile, so innocent, left me momentarily dazed, as if seeing the 17-year-old Arlo smiling at me from the past. Back then, his eyes had only seen me. But I knew he had changed. He was no longer my Ole. I trembled slightly, suppressing the inner turmoil, and smiled serenely at him. I don't need promises like that. I've told you before, Allah. I won't forgive you, and I'll never go back. I meant every word. Ola's face turned pale, his color draining instantly. I turned away and didn't look back, walking away without a second glance. My wrist was grabbed tightly. I turned around to see Ola's red eyes stubbornly fixed on me, his lips twisted into a mocking smile. Then a stack of photos rained down on me, falling like an endless snowstorm. I stood frozen, the buzzing sound in my ears, seeing Allah's lips moving as though saying something. Then Brian punched him hard, and the two men started struggling, plunging the scene into chaos. As the photos scattered across the floor, I trembled and began picking them up. My mind slowly cleared. The sharp, shrill screams of women and the low curses from men ringing in my ears. I heard Arlo yell, "What about you, Maxine?" "How many men did you sleep with to get the role?" "I cheated just once, and you're still holding it against me. What are you pretending to be?" I don't remember how I left. I was shaking, and when I came to, I found myself already in Brian's car. He had a bruise at the corner of his mouth, and the back of his hand was scraped, blood seeping out in tiny beads. Despite the pain, he gently covered me with a blanket. I remembered Ola's final words as I left. "Look, we're the same, dirty." I clutched my head in agony, feeling like I might break. My phone buzzed in my pocket, filling up with more and more search terms related to my name. Number Maxine scandal, number Maxine backers, number Maxine 7 years of climbing. The photos weren't blurred, all taken while I was crouching, dazed, picking up those images. Someone had taken them on purpose, zooming in on the pictures and comparing them to stills from the movie I had debuted in. The exact same red birthmark on my chest became the focus, and the internet went wild. Within 10 minutes, the comment section was flooded with millions of nasty comments. No one cared about the truth. All they cared about was whether a top-tier actress could fall from grace. I gave a bitter smile and curled up in the back seat, tears flowing uncontrollably. A battered hand from the front seat passed me a tissue, but I didn't take it. Instead, I grabbed his sleeve and struggled to speak, parting my lips. "It's not me. The person in the photo isn't me." Brian didn't hesitate for a second. He reached over and tightly grasped my hand. "I know." The afternoon sunlight slanted across him, and the determination and sincerity in his eyes reminded me of 5 years ago, when Brian had told me word by word that wearing a bikini shouldn't be stigmatized. Now, as he gently wiped away my tears with his thumb, he softly comforted me. "I believe in you. Don't cry, okay? Stay strong. I'll go with you to the police." I had saved all the IDs of those spreading rumors, as well as screenshots and recordings of video views, shares and likes, and submitted them to the police. They said that after the case was filed, it would take time to investigate and gather evidence. After leaving the police station, I called Susan. She reassured me, "Don't be scared. The company has already blocked the photos and sent legal notices to a few of those troublemaking accounts. For the next few days, I'll be watching and reporting anyone who dares to spread this." Brian, showing great sensitivity, stepped aside and leaned against the front of the car, quietly observing me. After a while, he seemed to have a thought. He pulled out his phone, furrowing his brow, and typed a few words. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up. Brian had shared the statement I posted on my social media 5 minutes ago. A person who rarely posts had made his first post about me. 6 words. Brief but powerful. Stop spreading rumors. He was the first person to speak out for me. Brian's fans, who adored him, were quick to control the comments under my post, and public opinion began to shift in my favor. But soon, a flood of paid commenters began to invade, as if someone invisible was orchestrating it, determined to nail me to the cross. Heir to the group. Allah breaks off engagement with Maxine. Allah Maxine the discarded Ori. These 2 trending topics emerged, elevating the absurd spectacle to new heights. I clicked on the latest interview video. Allah didn't appear, and Na responded on his behalf. She smiled softly in front of the camera. But when she mentioned my name, venom filled her eyes. Maxine. I don't know her. I vaguely heard she's quite reckless in her personal life. Allah used to like her a lot. But who would have thought she'd betray him? She flipped her long hair behind her ear, revealing a ruby ring on her finger, like a declaration of war, or maybe a provocation. Suddenly, someone snatched my phone away. I looked up to find Brian's face reflected in his eyes, pale. Don't look anymore. I'll take you home. Your grandmother is waiting for you, right? Grandma had been waiting for me at home. After everything, it was already dark. She must have been anxious. I rushed home, but in the alleyway, I bumped into the neighbor's grandmother. She rushed towards me, and a terrible premonition rose in my chest. Your grandmother's heart condition flared up. I ran back home like a madwoman, finding Grandma lying stiff on the floor. The neighbor said that while talking, Grandma had seen the news, gotten upset, and called Allah. Something in the conversation had triggered her condition. The ambulance arrived quickly, but the doctors' faces were grim, and I didn't dare to ask any questions, afraid of hearing bad news. When we reached the hospital, my legs were so weak I stumbled as I got out of the car, collapsing to my knees. I didn't catch up to Grandma, only watching as they wheeled her into the emergency room. Brian picked me up in his arms and gently set me down in the family waiting area. We had rushed out without wearing masks. People were coming and going, holding up their phones, snapping pictures. And it wouldn't be long before the media caught wind. But I didn't have the energy to care about that. Cold sweat soaked my back, and my mind was consumed with one thought. I just wanted Grandma to survive. As long as she was safe, I would trade anything. I buried my face in my arm, remaining perfectly still until someone sat next to me. When I looked up, I saw the crowd of onlookers had been asked to leave. I hesitated and whispered, "Brian, I'm so scared." His warm, dry hand covered mine, but I could clearly feel him trembling too. His voice, lighter than air, responded, "I'm here. Don't be afraid." I lowered my head even further, muttering to myself, "It's all my fault. I should have gone back earlier. I should have realized Grandma would confront Alia. She loves me so much. Seeing that news, she must have been so angry." Wait, Allah. What exactly did he say to Grandma? I fumbled to pull out my phone, but before I could dial, a male voice called from the end of the hallway. "Maxine, seeing the culprit?" I hurried over and slapped him hard across the face. Allah turned his head to the side, pressing his tongue against his cheek. But he didn't get angry. He lowered his eyes and, filled with remorse, apologized to me. The call I didn't answer was because I had been in a meeting at the time. So who did he speak to instead? He didn't respond. Frustrated, I slapped him again. "Maxine, I didn't know," he said, looking at me with panic in his eyes. "When I saw the news about you at the hospital, I panicked. I checked the call logs on my way here and saw that Grandma had called me. "Don't worry. Grandma will be fine." He tried to comfort me, stepping forward to hug me, but I pushed him away. I backed up and leaned against the wall just as my phone began to vibrate intensely. There were several message bubbles from Nina, asking if Arla had come to see me. When I didn't respond, she frantically urged me to stay away from him. She claimed she had spent 7 years with him, watching him go from having nothing to controlling everything, and that she was the one who deserved to be his wife. She said that I was actually the third party, mentioning that when Arla first met her, they had an affair. Even though he was drunk, he had still been calling my name. She also said that when we were in our 2nd year together, my rumors with Brian made the news. And that night, after Arla called me, he was sleeping in her bed. She mentioned that Arla had a cleanliness obsession and told me to back off. As I gripped my phone, my heart felt as if it were being crushed, ready to shatter. So, they had been connected all along, hadn't they? I had been such a fool who had loved him all these years, unaware of any of this. But why, at this moment, when Grandma's life was at risk, did they have to tell me the truth? Why was it so cruel to bring up the past when my loved one's life was on the line? I felt as though I was on the verge of falling apart. I had never hated Allaire like I did now, even if he had cheated, even if he had misunderstood me. I just wanted to forgive him, but now I hated him. I walked over to him and slammed my phone against his head. Blood began trickling down from his forehead. He looked at the screen, his panicked eyes filling with even more despair. "Can you and your mistress just stay the hell away from me?" I yelled at him. "Yes, I admit it. I was foolish, easy to deceive. Your I love you made me fall for you willingly for 7 years. But I don't love you anymore. I don't want you anymore," I screamed, grabbing his collar. "So please, just get out of my life, Alla." His face showed sorrow, but he didn't say anything. Finally, it was Brian who came up from behind and embraced me, trying to comfort me as the emergency room light turned off and the doctor came out. He removed his mask to speak to me, but I couldn't hear him. All I could see was Grandma being wheeled out, her face covered by a white cloth. When I was younger, Grandma used to tell me that when people passed away, they became stars. Stars that guide their families. She would hug me and point to the 2 brightest stars in the sky, saying they were my parents. Back then, I cried easily, feeling fragile. She would smile and tell me not to cry, that Grandma would always be there for me. But I never thought forever would turn out to be only a few years. Now I had nothing left. No family, no love, nothing. After taking care of Grandma's funeral arrangements, I finally had the courage to return to that small courtyard. The smell of pear blossoms was in the air. The dining table was full of food, fish soup, which I loved, and the saucy meat I had asked for. I sat down like a zombie, grabbing a piece of meat and shoving it into my mouth. Brian had been worried about me in the past few days. He had taken leave from the set and followed me everywhere I went. He snatched my chopsticks away from me, saying, "It's gone bad. Don't eat it." When he saw my swollen red eyes, his words got caught in his throat. I glared at him, but after a moment, my stomach churned, and I ran to the trash can to throw up. He squatted beside me, rubbing my back patiently. "If you want to cry, just cry." I had stayed composed after hearing about Grandma's passing and seeing her cremated alone. But now, hearing his words, I completely broke down. That day, I nearly lost control. I clung to Brian's arm, my tears and snot soaking his shirt. When I finally grew tired of crying, I collapsed into his arms, and he gently supported my waist, laying me down on the bed. I had a dream that Grandma was in it. She smiled at me, saying she would protect me. When I woke up, the police had issued an official statement. After technical analysis, the so-called provocative photos had been proven to be digitally altered, and the person in them wasn't me. They retrieved the surveillance footage from the studio hallway from the day of the incident and identified the person who had taken and leaked the photos. From there, they tracked the trail and found Nina, eventually discovering the mastermind behind it all. I was called to the police station to confirm the case, and as I was leaving, I brushed past him. I recognized him. It was the old man from 6 months ago who had asked me how much for a night, only to be forced to kneel and apologize to me by Allah. He had lost face, held a grudge, and hired someone to create a set of fake photos using AI. He had intended to ruin my reputation with false rumors, but when Nina found out, she bought the photos for a high price and passed them on to Allah, intentionally misleading him into believing that I was the person in the photos. Just like that, the truth came out. When I stepped outside the police station, several media outlets were already gathered, shoving microphones in my face and bombarding me with questions. Brian was the first to speak up for me. "What's your relationship like off-screen? Did Allah's secretary frame you? Did you two have a history? Will you get back together with Allah?" I smiled at the camera and only answered the last question. "No." As Susan escorted me to the car, I rolled down the window and saw Allah not far away. He looked exhausted and vulnerable. When he heard my response, his dry eyes shimmered with unshed tears. He seemed like he had something to say. But in the end, he kept quiet. The car started, and I didn't look back. 3 days later, I officially joined the set. Susan looked concerned and asked, "Are you sure you don't want to take a break?" I understood what she meant. Grandma had just passed away, and I had gone through a public online attack. Now, after clearing my name, I was diving straight into high-intensity work. She was worried I wouldn't be able to handle it. I remembered something she had told me before and smiled faintly. "No rest for me. I'm going to walk the flower path forever." This way, I could live up to all the hard work she had put in over the years. The film was shot in a small town, and I stayed there for over 2 weeks. Then one day, I received a long handwritten letter. It was from Allah. He had hurried back to Saya recently and heard that Na had been dumped by him, then turned to seduce his half-brother. The battle over company shares had reached a boiling point. Under such circumstances, he had found the time to write to me. In the afternoon, when I had no scenes to shoot, my assistant rented a boat for me, and I leisurely toured the lake. Sitting at the bow, I slowly opened the letter. The handwriting, though practiced many times, still looked like worms crawling across the page. "Maxine, I don't know if you're even willing to open this letter. Maybe just hearing my name makes you disgusted, but I still want to defend myself. Don't mind me, okay? Let me think about where to start. Do you remember when I was 17 and put your mum's ring on your finger? The one she left for her future daughter-in-law? Maybe you won't believe it, but at that time, I truly cared for you. But things shifted when your family went bankrupt. That woman returned with her illegitimate son, fighting me for the family fortune. My father favored them and wanted to transfer shares to them, but I couldn't accept it. They had nothing to do with what we built, and they didn't deserve anything. After you entered the entertainment industry, I met Na. She was very capable, and with her help, I quickly gained support from the board, even managing to remove the illegitimate son from the company. I celebrated by taking Mina out, and I got drunk. That's when I confused her with you. Maxine, you don't know, but I think about you constantly. It almost drives me crazy, especially when I saw rumors of you with other men. I drank myself into a stupor. I wanted to come after you right away, but my shares were nothing compared to my father's, who could easily throw us out of City A with a snap of his fingers. I waited 5 years until I heard of his serious illness. Once I took control, I rushed to find you. I should have been happy, but on the way here, I overheard some men talking about your body, and I just snapped. Once doubt is planted, it grows uncontrollably. So, when Nina showed me those photos, I believed them immediately. Kicking you out of the industry was just a way for me to keep you at home and protect you. But fate always plays tricks. When you found out about my betrayal during those 2 days you were gone, I searched everywhere for you, and my heart shattered. I brought you those photos because I wanted to talk things through. I thought since I betrayed you, you must have done the same to me. I hoped we could clear things up and be together again, but it seems you don't want me anymore. I never expected anyone to secretly take and leak those photos. The company's stock fell, and the board forced me to choose between you and the shares. I'm sorry, Maxine. The 26-year-old Ola was truly an idiot. But could you give me one more chance? I realized I was wrong. After returning to sea, I retrieved Nina's and Grandma's phone calls and handed them over to the police. But Na insists she didn't know about Grandma's heart condition. The police can't do anything for now. But don't worry, I'll avenge Grandma. I know you hate me, but I still love you. Just like I did when I was 17. I love you deeply. The March sun was warm and bright. I thought for a moment, and then decided to call Allah. He picked up almost immediately, his voice flat, but with clear surprise that he was trying to hide. Did you really love me, Ellery? Without hesitation, he answered, Of course, Maxine. I've always loved you. I smiled slightly and asked, Okay, you say you love me. But why, when you received those photos, didn't you ask me about them right away? Why did you believe them so easily? Loving someone isn't like that. You don't just judge them without giving them a chance to explain. Ayla was silent. I continued. You love me, but betray me. You love me, but don't trust me. This kind of fleeting and insincere love is something I'd rather not have. The other end of the line was quiet, only the sound of his breathing. I wasn't sentimental, so I hung up the phone. Maybe this would be the last time we ever spoke. 3 months later, at the wrap party for the new film, I sat at the table with my assistant, who was casually scrolling through her phone. Suddenly, I heard a low exclamation, and my elbow was gently nudged. Mr. Aller hit someone with his car, she said. I heard Mina has evidence of his crimes and is forcing him to give up all his shares and step down. I listened quietly, sipping my red wine. Mina died on the spot. There was blood everywhere. The photos are quite scary. My assistant, sensing my lack of reaction, asked if I felt anything. I tugged at the corner of my mouth and answered honestly, no. We ended things a long time ago. From the moment I said we were done, at that party, I had drunk a little too much red wine and felt slightly dizzy. I stood up and went outside to get some fresh air with Brian following me. Your face is so red. Are you feeling okay? The air's stuffy, he asked. I tilted my head, smiling at him. Can you take me for a drive? Brian paused for a few seconds, then suddenly grabbed my wrist and pushed me into the back seat of the car. His warm breath brushed against my ear as the seatbelt clicked into place. I pinched my ear, feeling flushed for some reason. Brian drove steadily, while I sat in the back seat with the window halfway open. The heavy summer evening breeze helped clear some of my unpleasant thoughts. A few times I unconsciously lifted my gaze, and Brian's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. The tattoo of pear blossoms on his arm was still striking. I instinctively turned my eyes away, but then I heard him speak softly. It's been 5 years. We've worked on 2 films together. I've long since fallen out of character. I closed my eyes, listening to the sound of the necklace dangling inside the car. A sudden, sharp break in the silence brought a clean scent of pear blossoms near. Can you open your eyes and look at me, my leading lady? End of the story.